Ever wished you could grab a quick bite during your busy medieval workday? Turns out, they did too. This video explores the fascinating parallels between our modern fast food culture and the ingenious quick meals ordinary people enjoyed in the Middle Ages. You'll be amazed at the clever culinary solutions they devised, proving that convenience is truly timeless. The modern image of the Middle Ages is often painted in two colors: the gold-gilded feasts of kings or the mud-caked hunger of peasants. Yet reality, as always, lived in the shaded spaces in between. In those bustling medieval streets, where merchants hawked spices and fishmongers shouted over the clamor of hooves, there existed a rhythm of eating that feels startlingly familiar. People rushed between tasks, trades, and travels, and when time was short and the day long, they reached for something quick, cheap, and sustaining. It's here that we uncover the forgotten flavors of the feudal era, the foods not enshrined in banqueting halls or monastic refectories, but in the hands of laborers, sailors, and wandering artisans. These meals had to be portable, hearty, and, perhaps most importantly, safe enough to eat hours after preparation in a world without refrigeration. This meant they relied on preservation techniques so ingrained in the medieval mind that to us they now seem almost alien in their efficiency. Take the medieval market square. Imagine it as a living organism, each stall a cell performing a vital function, each street a pulsing artery moving goods, voices, and smells. The air was thick, with the scent of roasting meat, the tang of brined fish, the sweetness of honey cakes. Vendors sold street eats to passers-by in ways that mirror our own food trucks and market stalls. Except here, the transaction wasn't just about food. It was about survival. One of the kings of medieval convenience food was the humble pie, not the delicate pastry of modern patisseries, but a thick-crusted, sealed package of sustenance. Wrapped in sturdy dough, these pies could be eaten days later, carried to the fields, or on the road, the crust acting as both container and preservative. In some cases, the crust wasn't even meant to be eaten. It was simply the medieval equivalent of Tupperware, keeping the contents safe from dirt and rot. Some pasties were so well packed they could travel for days by cart or ship before being eaten, still rich with meat, vegetables, and spices from distant lands. Beyond pies, roasted sausages were popular in crowded towns, sold sizzling from street braziers, ready to be eaten on the spot. Nuts, often roasted or candied in honey, provided bursts of energy for merchants and craftsmen. And then there were the proto-sandwiches, slabs of bread topped with cheese, cured meats, or pickled vegetables. Simple yet ingenious, often served open-faced because bread was not merely a plate, it was part of the meal. These foods were more than convenient. They were shaped by the limitations and possibilities of their world. Without cold storage, people turned to salting, smoking, pickling, and fermenting as everyday magic. Fish were preserved in barrels of brine, vegetables soaked in vinegar, and grains stored as flour for quick baking into small flatbreads on hot stones. Nothing was wasted. Even yesterday's bread could be softened with broth or layered with stews, creating a quick, hearty dish. But there is a deeper layer to this. The methods of preservation and preparation were not born of trial and error alone. Medieval cookery manuscripts, many of which survive only in fragments or hidden in archives, reveal systems of pairing ingredients in ways modern science is only now beginning to validate. Combinations that limited bacterial growth, improved digestion, and prolonged shelf life without ice or electricity. Was this simply inherited wisdom, passed from generation to generation? Or does it point to a more ancient body of culinary knowledge, perhaps preserved from earlier civilizations whose methods are now mostly forgotten? The deeper you dig into medieval foodways, the more it feels less like a random survival strategy, and more like an echo, the remnant of a larger, older framework of food science we have only partially recovered. These so-called fast foods were not crude or haphazard. They were finely tuned to the demands of a society in constant motion, where laborers, pilgrims, and soldiers alike needed energy on the move. Picture a dockside in 14th century London. Cargo ships from the Baltic unloading salted fish, barrels of beer being rolled to taverns, pies stacked in woven baskets, ready to feed sailors before they departed again. There is an almost mathematical efficiency to it, the way goods moved, from production to consumption with minimal waste. This is a logistics system disguised as everyday life. Yet, curiously, certain details about these foods are missing from official records. Recipes written for the common man rarely survived, and when they did, they were often embedded in unrelated manuscripts, the margins of a herbal remedy book, or the back page of a guild ledger. It is as if the culinary life of the ordinary medieval citizen was intentionally overlooked, their foodways deemed unworthy of preservation compared to court banquets or monastic feasts. This absence raises questions. Was this merely the neglect of historians who favored elite culture, or were some of these methods and recipes deliberately obscured, lost in the shuffle between oral tradition and written word? It is here, in the silence of the archives, that the story takes on the texture of a mystery. For some of these fast food recipes that survive contain ingredients now rare or extinct in Europe. A few involve techniques, like certain fermentation rituals or bread-proofing methods, whose chemical effects are difficult to replicate without the precise conditions described in the texts. Could these be remnants of older food technologies, perhaps inherited from Roman, Byzantine, or even more ancient kitchens? Could they hint at a forgotten network of culinary trade, one that spanned continents long before Columbus? The answer may lie not just in written records, but in the surviving artifacts, carbonized loaves found in archaeological digs, residue analysis of old cooking pots, and microscopic studies of crumbs trapped in the wood grain of medieval tables. Every sample tells a story, not just of what was eaten, but how it was prepared, stored, and carried. And sometimes, those stories do not align with the accepted narrative of what the Middle Ages should have been. The idea that medieval people had no convenience food collapses under the weight of this evidence. Their quick meals may not have come in paper wrappers or cardboard boxes, but the underlying principle, the need for speed, portability, and taste, was exactly the same. The past is whispering to us here. Convenience is not a modern invention. It is a human instinct as old as civilization itself. We picture medieval society as moving slowly, but within its city walls, there was a constant hum of urgency. The iron was always hot somewhere. Grain was being milled, ale was fermenting, and bread was sliding into ovens whose fires never went out. At the heart of this system stood the communal kitchen, a place where both necessity and economy came together in one furnace-lit room. Shared ovens were as vital to a medieval neighborhood as a water well. Not every home could afford the wood or the brick structure to bake its own bread, so people brought their dough to the baker's oven. Some loaves were left to bake while their owners returned to work, picked up later, still warm. Others became the base for open-faced meals, bread topped with salted fish, onion, or soft cheese. The baker's ledger sometimes doubled as a public calendar, marking not just whose loaf was whose, but whose debts were paid, whose feast days were approaching, and who was away on pilgrimage. And then there were the public cookshops, the medieval equivalent of today's fast casual restaurants. In cities like London, Paris, and Bruges, these cookshops catered to everyone from merchants to masons. They didn't just serve food, they prepared it for those who brought their own ingredients. Imagine a mason handing over a joint of salted pork in the morning, returning at midday to find it roasted and ready to eat, perhaps with a thick wedge of bread baked in the same oven. Here, convenience wasn't an indulgence, It was a tool of survival for the working class. Soldiers marching long distances carried pre-cooked grain cakes or hardened biscuits that could be softened in broth. It was, in a way, the earliest form of meal prep. Make it in bulk, preserve it well, carry it for days. And this system was sustained not only by necessity, but by something more ingenious: fermentation. Fermentation was the medieval miracle worker. Pickled vegetables, fermented fish sauces, and, of course, ale and beer all made perishable ingredients last far beyond their natural lifespan. In some regions, even dairy was fermented into hard cheeses or cultured butters that could survive weeks without spoiling. Modern science tells us fermentation creates lactic acid, which inhibits harmful bacteria, but the medieval mind saw it differently. For them, it was an art guided by inherited wisdom, timed to the seasons and adjusted by instinct. Some fermentation methods recorded in the few surviving cookery texts are surprisingly exact, calling for specific wood types in the barrels or for ingredients to be added on certain days of the moon cycle. Here, folklore and science met without contradiction. Was this simply superstition, or did these moon-timed fermentations tap into natural temperature and humidity shifts that modern industrial food systems have forgotten to replicate? This is where the story darkens. Not all of these techniques survived the transition into the modern age. When you comb through the fragmentary manuscripts, like the 14th century for me of curry or the French viandier, you find tantalizingly brief notes. To keep a bird for a fortnight without spoil, followed by only half a method, or recipes for bread that specify the black salt, a mineral additive whose origin is unclear and whose role in preservation is still debated. Were these simply gaps caused by scribes omitting details they assumed every cook knew? Or were certain secrets intentionally left unwritten, passed only within tight guild circles? Guilds guarded their culinary knowledge as jealously as goldsmiths guarded their alloys. A master cook in a wealthy household might know how to pickle meats in a spiced vinegar that kept them edible for months, but that method might never be shared with outsiders. Some speculate that these preservation secrets could have roots in far older traditions, perhaps even brought back by crusaders who encountered Middle Eastern preservation techniques that blended salt, honey, and exotic spices in exact ratios. And so we begin to understand medieval fast food not just as a convenience, but as a controlled economy of knowledge. Recipes weren't merely food instructions, they were currency. If you could preserve fish without ice, or make bread last twice as long without going stale, you held power. The deeper we look, the stranger it becomes. Archaeological tests on food residues found in ceramic cooking pots from medieval York, Lubeck, and Naples show chemical markers of ingredients we do not associate with those regions, traces of spices, fruits, and even certain legumes that suggest long distance. Food networks more complex than officially recorded. Could some of the medieval quick meals we think of as humble local fare actually have been part of an ancient global exchange? What we eat has always been shaped by what we can move, preserve, and prepare quickly. And in the Middle Ages, where a laborer's survival could depend on eating before the next bell, the quest for convenience created systems we barely understand, some of which we may have lost forever. And yet, in scattered pages and rare artifacts, a few of these hidden recipes have survived. They wait like locked chests in the archives, strange instructions in faded ink, ingredients with names no longer used, cooking times measured not in minutes, but in the burning of candles. We can try to recreate them, but without the exact conditions, something is always missing. The flavor is just slightly off. Perhaps that is the point. Perhaps these foods were not meant to be entirely understood outside their original time, not just because of lost techniques, but because of what they symbolized. They were born from a balance of scarcity and abundance, from a trust in processes, both seen and unseen. To truly taste them as they were would require stepping into that world, its rhythms, its markets, its ovens glowing in the dark. But in the next part of this journey, we will try. We will open the faded pages, interpret the measurements, and attempt to breathe life back into the flavors that once fed a civilization on the move. And in doing so, we may discover that the line between medieval and modern fast food is not just thin, it is invisible. To bring the past into the present, we begin with the archives. Faded parchment, bound in leather darkened by centuries, offers recipes so brief they read more like riddles than instructions. One from a 15th century merchant's ledger reads, "A pie of sea fish, salted 3 days, mix with wine, cloves, and the white powder, bake in a coffin crust." The white powder is never explained. Was it flour, chalk, powdered eggshell for calcium, or an ingredient now lost entirely? In the dim light of monastic libraries, scholars have pieced together similar clues. A French note from 1380 describes a kind of portable meat patty, wrapped in leaves and baked under coals, that could be carried on horseback for the length of 2 moons. Tests with modern ingredients suggest the wrapping leaves released antibacterial oils, slowing spoilage. If true, this points to a scientific understanding cloaked in the language of custom, a knowledge of food chemistry hidden in plain sight. Some of the most intriguing finds are not in recipe books at all, but in household inventories. A 14th century innkeeper in Lubeck listed jars of night vinegar, a spiced pickling liquid said to keep vegetables fresh through the damp northern winters. Archaeologists studying residue from similar jars have found traces of cinnamon and long pepper, expensive imports that would have deterred pests and mold. Why name it night vinegar? Perhaps it was made in darkness to protect its potency, or perhaps the name held symbolic meaning tied to the lunar cycles mentioned in other preservation rituals. Reconstructing these recipes today requires not just ingredients, but environment. Medieval pies, for instance, were baked in ovens that cooled slowly over hours, infusing the crust with smoke and minerals from the wood ash. Without that precise combination of temperature and time, the texture changes subtly and the preservation effect weakens. Modern attempts often fall short because they cannot replicate the invisible variables, the humidity of a kitchen in November, the mineral content of the well water, the ash from a specific species of oak. And yet, when modern chefs attempt these recreations, something remarkable happens. The flavors are bold, simple, and strangely familiar, as though our palates still carry the memory of them. A pasty made with salted pork, onions, and sage feels as satisfying in a modern hand as it did in a mason's glove centuries ago. A slice of dense, honey-sweetened bread still delivers the same burst of energy it once gave a weary traveler on the road to market. This raises the question: if convenience has always been a human instinct, what else have we carried forward unknowingly? Could some of our modern street food, meat pies, pickled snacks, cured sausages, be direct descendants of these medieval creations, their origins obscured by time? The more we uncover, the more the boundaries between then and now dissolve. That late-night sandwich eaten on the way home from work is not so different from the bread and cheese meals of the medieval stonemason. The food truck selling hot meat pastries mirrors the 14th century street vendor with his brazier. The coffee in your hand may be a modern drink, but the need for a warm, stimulating beverage has echoes in the ale, spiced wine, and herbal infusions served to medieval travelers. Perhaps the greatest secret of medieval fast food is that it was never truly lost. It simply adapted, changing shape to fit each era's tastes and tools. The recipes may have been scattered, but the idea they embodied has never left us. Food that is quick, portable, sustaining, and, when made with care, deeply satisfying. And so, the legacy of the medieval quick bite is not merely historical. Trivia. It is a reminder that convenience is not the enemy of quality, and that even in an age without electricity, people crafted meals that were efficient, nourishing, and rich with flavor. They did not separate survival from pleasure. Both lived in the same bite, peeling back the layers of parchment, ash, and time. We glimpse not just what they ate, but how they thought about food as a tool, as a craft, and as a quiet form of connection. To eat quickly in the Middle Ages did not mean to eat poorly. It meant to take a piece of the hearth with you into the world, a small comfort in a time of uncertainty. And perhaps that is the true hidden recipe, not the precise ratio of salt to vinegar or the exact number of cloves, but the principle. That food is a bridge between the fixed point of home and the moving current of life. That truth has survived every century since, waiting for us to taste it again. If you enjoyed uncovering these lost medieval secrets, give this video a like, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden past. Drop a comment below. Which forgotten recipe would you try if you could taste history for yourself?